The COVID pandemic that caused forced lockdowns resulted in county governments in its never-ending crusade against automobiles to close roadways, temporarily, of course, from automobile use. Recently, the County Parks Department declared that it intended to permanently narrow a stretch of Bethesda's Little Falls Parkway for use as an additional parkland. Now, in fact, several citizens groups of the affected neighborhoods are fighting back. Mark, I'll go to you because you kind of live near there. And according to Tom Elridge of Kenwood Citizens Association, they've taken a perfectly functioning roadway and made it ugly. It's an ugly mess that's complicating everyone's lives. So what's the answer here? Is it just, not in my backyard? I want my easy commute.
Well, there has been an effort, a rather expensive effort, to increase the miles of bike lanes in Montgomery County. And it's interesting because we have really good census data about the number of people who use bikes and who commute by bike. The census collects that every 10 years. And it is less than 10,000 people. What we're seeing is an effort to use transportation dollars in a way that basically disadvantages cars, that makes things slower for cars. And it really is, if you're going to do a sort of Bentham analysis of the who gets scored or who gets advantage, it really puts the overwhelming majority of Montgomery County residents who use cars at a disadvantage.
So Mike, we've been talking several weeks ago about Old Georgetown Road being narrowed for additional bike lanes. And that was where they took 6 lanes and narrowed it to 4. But now the Montgomery County Department of Transportation has announced that Tuckerman Lane will be put on a road diet. I love this pilot program, which would eliminate 2 lanes of roadway from use between Falls Road and Rockville Pike. At last week's hearing, I understand that there was considerable vocal opposition to the plan. And, the real issue is you're going to take, in one stretch, there's several stretches of Tuckerman Lane, but there's a stretch from Rockville Pike to Old Georgetown Road, which is 4 lanes. You take away 2 lanes and make it 2 lanes each way or 1 lane each way, you're going to create total gridlock. So I guess, is the Transportation Department listening to the citizens on this issue?
Probably not. I mean, honestly, we know what that number looks like, and I think the intent is we want to incentivize more people to do that. The question is, will they, and do they, and can you engineer that to occur? And if you're going to create bike lanes, it makes more sense to put bike lanes in places where you already have right of way and you have road than it does to try and figure out another way to put it. So that's where they end up going back and putting it in the middle of roads. But the reality is, and I drove down Old Georgetown Road, and really that's crazy. I've been on that when it's packed. Now you're down to 2 lanes. I don't go down there that often, but I can see where there would be significant frustration. And when I saw that the bike community came out, and I'm supportive of the bike community, but when I saw they had their rally, that was all of the bikers that you could probably get to show up, and it was a nice crowd. But if all of those are the folks who are using that as a commuting lane each day, that's not that many people relative to others who are driving cars. Do I have an answer? I don't know that I do, but I think we've got to come up with a way that recognizes that, especially as we come out of pandemic, you have a lot more people that are driving again. We're not using as much transit for a variety of reasons. People are working off hours in ways that they didn't before. And I think to create a dynamic that makes it even harder for people to get around just creates a level of frustration that isn't particularly warranted.
Well, one of my gripes, and this I expressed this about when we were doing Thrive 2050 Montgomery and discussing that. I think the suggestion for this Tuckerman Lane Road pilot program was introduced during 2020, and I think that any public hearing that was done in 2020 and even in 2021, they should go back to the drawing board, because people had other concerns and they didn't participate. And so, I don't think those are valid comparisons. And I'm certainly hopeful that there'll be enough opposition. They did try something in Wheaton as a pilot program on Georgia Avenue of all places. And they, decided after 6 months that that was a dumb idea. And,
But I think your point though, Casey, and the reason to redo it is not so much that I think that the process was necessarily flawed. I just think we're in a very different environment than we were 3 years ago. And so and people are still emerging and seeing what their new world looks like. And so it's different today. And so I think you have to be able to ask that question again, because it's a different context and people have a different scenario than they did during that period of time. We're not going back, we're going forward in a different way.
Well, I'm going to take the last word on this. If they think they're going to force people out of their cars, they're smoking crack. Because people will not give up their cars. They love their cars. They love the privacy. They love the convenience, and they're not giving up their cars. So, it's a fool's errand to think that they're going to.